Hello, and welcome to Talking About Regeneration, the podcast that's all about stem cell and regenerative medicine and some other stuff too. I'm Kevin McCormack, Communications Director at CIRM. We're California's stem cell agency, and we have $5.5 billion to change the world. And this podcast will introduce you to some of the people who are going to help us do just that. Enjoy the show. Hello everyone and welcome. And for anyone who knows anything about CIRM, our guest today needs no introduction. I think it's safe to say that without him, CIRM wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have a job. And so for that reason alone, I'm delighted to welcome Bob Klein, the driving force behind both Proposition 71 and Proposition 14. Those are the voter-approved ballot initiatives that created CIRM. Bob, welcome to Talking About Regeneration. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you. It's a privilege, Kevin. Anything that supports the wonderful scientists and doctors and patient advocates that are the body and soul of CIRM it's a privilege to participate.
Thank you. I agree. I completely agree. So let's talk about the initiatives. I mean, how much harder was it the second time around to get voters to approve funding CIRM? I mean, this time around you had to contend with the pandemic, a shortage of voter signatures to start with, and then the election itself at the height of the COVID crisis and during one of the most, I think it's safe to say, turbulent political times in recent history.
Well, it was a real adventure the second time. It's always hard. You've got a complicated message about stem cell and genetics and therapy development. It is always a challenge to get 900,000 or 1 million signatures for a ballot initiative. But in the middle of a pandemic where we had to shut down the signature gathering at grocery stores and outlets, where we had to go to petitions that had to be sent to the voters and get them back in exactly the right form, it was a real challenge to get the signatures to get on the ballots, including a margin of error. But it was particularly an issue that the state went into part of the national recoil economically from the pandemic restrictions. So people were concerned about the amount of money, and they didn't understand that I'd structured the initiative so it would really act as a stimulus for the state with no payments starting by the state on the bonds that would be issued to fund it until year 6. So it was a challenge, but I would say there's the inspiration of all the patient groups working on it, the inspiration of having the president of the American Society for Cancer Research, who became one of the ballot signers for us. So the scientists, the doctors, the patients lift you up and carry you through these barriers and incredible challenges. But it is not something you want to do unless you're going to be passionately committed, because there is a barrier and a problem every day or many times a day. And fortunately, my oldest son, Robert, ran all of the different consultants for me, and we had phenomenal people like Art Torres, who's your vice chairman of the board, working in his off time. We had Melissa King, Anna Maybeck, who was on the staff, which we had to keep to a very small number. Mitra Hushman, who was head of our scientific group. We had a really key, committed, compassionate staff that worked our way through the challenges.
But even so, I mean, trying to get the message out at a time when everyone else's attention is focused not just on the pandemic, but also the economy, which, as you mentioned, was cratering, and then the kind of the whole mess around the election itself and the uncertainty around the election itself. Those are some pretty sizable barriers.
Yeah, it was a huge barrier, particularly uh, we were fighting the problem that there was a vital national election going on that was consuming the people who would normally contribute to for the social good for the medical advancements from these therapies and research. And we were facing a ballot environment where there was $1 billion spent on the California initiatives that in 2020, $1 billion.
Wow.
So we had a small budget and we had to use really innovative technologies to stretch that budget. And we ended up with 8.5 million yes votes, which is the largest number of yes votes for any bond initiative in the history of the United States. So California's visionary voters are incredible, and thank God it is California. As the 5th greatest economy in the world, we're one of the few places that could pull this off, and we have the voters with the vision and the passion and the commitment to change healthcare, really, for not just the country but the world, through this initiative to take everything that happened through Proposition 71, all of the therapies for diabetes and heart and cancer that are really in clinical trials for blindness, move them forward to the next level and bring them closer to that ultimate delivery to the patient. So the California voters and their vision is something that anchored our faith that this could happen.
I know there were a few nervous days after the election until the results were kind of solidified, but we won narrowly. But as a soccer fan, a 1-0 win is a win, and we don't care. So let's look back at Prop 71. You were just talking about that now, the first version of CIRM, if you like. And so when you look at the accomplishments of the agency, 70 clinical trials funded, another 30 clinical trials made possible by our early support, a couple of projects that we supported already approved by the FDA. Were you surprised at just how much we were able to do?
Well, I thought that the results to date of Proposition 71, because that research and those clinical trials keep giving to the entire world in terms of the data and the advancements, but the results to date have been incredible. And it is important to recognize that on a global scale, California is number 2 in the world in biomedical research capacity, behind just the United States. So looked at as a country, the resources we have for research are incredible globally, and they have really been committed to this field and the interface with genomics. So stem cells and genetically engineered therapies, as well as straight stem cell therapies, are exploding in terms of their potential. But I would also say, beyond the clinical trials, fundamental brilliance is shown in the alpha clinics, and that network of sharing between those alpha clinics that has been created under Maria Milan's leadership, where it isn't just biotech based upon venture capital and the cost of venture capital that's going to make these decisions and cut off the access to clinical trials early because of financial pressures. It's the patient that's at the core of these alpha clinic, and with the great universities we have and research institutions in the state embracing the alpha clinics that advance the leading edge on the clinical level, we have a way to bypass the boardroom and financial decisions that could cut off tremendous progress, because it's not the popular idea. It's not the idea they think is the most feasible, and it allows for great breakthroughs. I think that CIRM has made tremendous progress in the FDA breakthrough designations we have. I think we have 12 in total. Maybe it's as high as 17 now, with therapies that are advancing from phase 2 into phase 3 trials, getting close to broad distribution for patients. But when you look at Prop 71, David Baltimore won the Nobel Prize for recombinant DNA that unleashed one of the prior revolutions in medicine from California, from a California base, that led to 100 critical heart and cancer drugs. He said to me, Bob, when I was writing it, you need to write in a structure where through peer review and the board, there is an ability for breakthrough ideas not to get suffocated by the dominant idea of its time. And this board, through therapies like CD47 for cancer, which was highly contested in peer review, there was the opportunity in peer review with a group of peer reviewers that were from many disciplines to get the perspective that there were people who had vested themselves in the field, who really couldn't disentangle themselves from their prior research and their lab's research. And this is a matter of public record. We can never mention the names of the people, but it is important to note that there were enough other people in peer review as we designed the peer review, people from other fields who recognized the breakthrough potential and graded this highly, that the board on appeal could take it up and vote through that therapy, which has now been acquired by Gilead and is in phase 3 trials and is showing remarkable impact on cancer, that we could get a breakthrough idea to defeat cancer stem cells through a system that otherwise could have been choked off by the vested interest of labs who have tried many approaches that have failed and really are not willing to take a risk on a new technology. So I think that's one of the most impressive things we have, is a system that has the ability to really get by the biases in the field and get breakthroughs through clinical trials to give them a chance to prove themselves and advance therapies for patients, which is what we're all about.
Absolutely. And obviously the building in that flexibility in the grants working group, that panel of experts who do review those programs is essential. And having some members of the board, patient advocate members, really does help add another element to that. And I think that's been so important. So I know there was a lot of criticism in the early days, and still is to some extent, about the possible perception of conflicts of interest on the board. What's your response to that? Because of that notion of many of those on the board belong to heads of institutions that are going to get funding from CIRM.
Right. Well, so as you know, first of all, I designed the conflict provisions initially and after approval directly in line with the National Academy of Science, the National Academy of Medicine. And it goes beyond the conflict provisions for either the National Academy of Science or the National Academy of Medicine. The members and leadership of those institutions have been extremely complimentary to CIRM because of that history and how well it's performed under those standards. CIRM commissioned, when I was there as chairman, a study to see if we could improve it. We got back results. We adopted even stricter requirements. And we have had really statements of appreciation for these advanced standards by the controllers in past years, by their oversight board review. I think it's performed extraordinarily well. And the scientific community in California, the scientific community in the United States and around the world looks at CIRM as a model for advancing the protections of the best science, always excluding any bias.
So as you sat down to write Proposition 14, what were the big issues you wanted to cover that weren't in Prop 71?
Well, from a big picture, I would say it was critical to communicate both in writing, but then by directive action, inclusiveness of the medicine that was being produced and the decision-making to make those medical advances and clinical trial advances. So 3 examples of that. One is that most of the leadership in the science and clinical trial capacity in the state is lined up along the coastline. So it was important to communicate to the public that we're going to serve the whole state, the Great Inland Empire, the Great Central Valleys. And so one of the things that I did in writing this initiative is create these community care centers of excellence, which could take great hospitals in the Inland Empire, or even a new UC campus, for example, in the Riverside, San Bernardino area, and set up the potential for them to be community care centers of excellence that could leverage off of the ability and knowledge of the alpha clinics and expand that leading edge medicine for clinical trials and clinical trial access into the Inland Empire, into the Great Central Valleys, so that it served the whole state at the leading edge of medicine. We also created 2 more permanent board positions that specifically isolated out the Inland Empire area and the Great Central Valleys with permanent appointments to include them permanently in the discussion to make sure this was implemented thoughtfully to serve the people of those great regions of California.
I think that's really important because I mean, obviously with the pandemic, one of the lessons we learned was the unequal access to not just great care, but any care. And so by creating these community centers of excellence, I mean, hopefully we'll be able to expand these therapies out to every part of California.
Exactly. And so there's a directive in the initiative to expand the alpha clinics, which have a phenomenal record. So there are institutions that clearly qualify for more alpha clinics, but there wasn't enough money. And in addition to expanding the alpha clinics to create this community care center of excellence, expansion that service these areas. But secondly, then the question you just addressed was, is there going to be real access? Is there real healthcare equity here for everyone? And so it wrote in that all of the royalty funds really go into an access fund to help people who don't have the money to travel to where their trial is. They don't have the lodging funds. They don't have the funds to take a caregiver with them if they're in very desperate medical conditions. So we set up a fund to deal with helping people who couldn't otherwise afford to access these opportunities, the ability to really travel with someone to help them with lodging, with meals, and travel costs being covered based on need.
It's always struck me as odd that it's no good creating and helping fund the development of therapies that have amazing potential to help people to save lives and change lives if people can't afford them. If you look at the first few gene therapies that have been approved, they're in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands. So obviously creating something that's both successful, but also available and accessible and affordable is so important.
is vital because, I mean, as you know, I began as a father, with the experience of a young son who had type 1 diabetes. His life was threatened every day by this special disease condition, and particularly the type of that condition that he had. So I was very patient oriented. And as I came into this area, I met hundreds, thousands of families and patients. And in meeting those individuals, you can't believe that you're meeting your moral obligation unless there's real access across the board for families in California. We don't have the funds in California to deal with the whole nation, but the whole nation will benefit from proving these new therapies in California. So by providing access in California, we will lead the way to access through the whole country.
Right. And I can testify that CIRM has become kind of a focal point for this, because I get calls and emails every day from patients all over the US, all over the world, in fact. I was getting phone calls from Pakistan and Ecuador just yesterday, asking about clinical trials and access to some of the work that we've been funding. So there's clearly a need, and clearly a sense that California really is a kind of a focal point and at the center of all this. So in many ways, the field of regenerative medicine has come a long way in a relatively short time since Prop 71. Are you really surprised it's moved so fast?
Well, I don't know if surprised is the right word. I'm inspired. I'm elated. I celebrate the progress because I know the patients, children born without immune systems that are now in school, 70 children without immune systems who could have died with other therapies failing to really remedy their situation, who are now in school. Individuals who've been blind for a decade, who can see their own children now. Young man who's paralyzed in a car accident, who can now socially interact with family and friends and use a computer. I mean, this is a quadriplegic, totally paralyzed. His parents were feeding him, spoon feeding him to keep him alive, who can now care for himself, have an independent life, and have a social interactions and a productive relationship where they have pride in their own contribution to the society. So there are tremendous rewards from this progress, even in the clinical trial phase that we're in now, with ongoing research that is critical to refine and advance these concepts. But the progress has been broader than I expected, because when I wrote the initiative, I didn't realize the incredible amount of talent, for example, in the junior colleges and the state colleges, where there are students with tremendous abilities that just didn't have the economic ability and economic capacity through their family to get into the great institutions. And through the Bridges program, created while I was chairman, by creating a board committee that I appointed to work with the chancellors of the state junior colleges and the state college system, we now have these phenomenal students, well over 1,000 now that have gone through this program, that have a success rate that's in the 90th percentile with once they go through the qualifying program and they spend 6 months in research with one of the great research institutions in the state, whether it's a university or the Salk Institute or City of Hope. These students represent tremendous quality and insights and intellectual capacity that was lost to the country, lost to the state, and which would have been a lost opportunity in their own lifetime, who are now becoming doctors, going through PhD programs, leading breakthroughs, writing breakthrough discoveries themselves. So that program that really opened access to a whole new group of people who were really passionately wanting to give and had the ability, but not the access. And then the fellowship programs were critical because there's so many individuals who wanted to go through postdoctoral studies and doctoral studies and become great scientists and contributors who couldn't live or support a family on the meager stipends they could get, and the fellowships make it possible for them to move forward with their life, have a family, and really sustain a career in this area, and not have to go into automobile sales or stock sales, and waste the tremendous intellect and passion that they have. So the breadth of this program went beyond the science and beyond the research to bring in a whole new area of intellectual capacity that was in our state already, and sustain the capacity of the whole additional cadre of brilliant people. I didn't anticipate that early on. And so that's a great reward of watching this progress, in addition to the medical progress that has been really astounding.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the favorite programs that people have is the Bridges program, because they get to meet these young, excuse me, really talented, bright individuals, but also the Spark program, the high school program where you meet these kids, many of whom are first generation Americans, and their desire to do this really incredibly complex science, and their ability to pick it up so fast is phenomenal. I mean, it's always a treat to see that. Having seen that we're making this kind of progress, what are the biggest obstacles you see coming in the years ahead?
Well, as you know, California is the only government that is funding clinical trials at scale for therapies derived from embryonic stem cells that would have otherwise ended up as medical waste, as excess from IVF clinics. They would have been thrown away when families who wanted to contribute to medical research, instead of throwing them away because they'd finished their creating their whole family, they couldn't contribute them. Now they can contribute them, and in the fetal stem cell area, there are clinical trials dealing with retinitis pigmentosa, a form of blindness, for example, where it's been very effective in helping restore sight. It's progressing. It's not completely refined, but it's been showing great progress. California is the only state, it's the only government, whether state or federal, in the United States at scale funding clinical trials coming from embryonic or fetal stem cells or tissue. Well, that's an incredible contribution, but I worry that unless the people in this country come to really reattach themselves to science and their commitment to science, that science will be suppressed. And this opportunity in the future could be cut off by ill-advised rules. Now, California, as a state, has state powers that under the US Constitution are reserved to the states. And stem cell research was not something that the writers of the Constitution put into the federal Constitution. Thank God, because California has an opportunity as a state to sustain and scale this approach in these clinical developments of these therapies, where we can restore sight or restore mobility above the waist in a significant way for quadriplegics, or help stop cancer when nothing else will work. we have the ability to deliver these therapies and protect the science, but I am very concerned that at a federal level, the ideological suppression may stop progress in other parts of this country. And California will really have to drive this on their own until they get these therapies to a point that they are so important to medicine that the country demands that the federal government come in and support them.
Right. This fight has always been very personal for you. I mean, earlier you mentioned your son, Jordan, and sadly, Jordan's no longer with us. How do you keep going? So how do you keep fighting so that we can get that kind of help for all the other Jordans who are out there?
So when you lose a son, as a father, you can't really imagine a large number of other children like Jordan dying.
Mhm.
So if you have the ability to act morally, you know the pain of your own loss. And it becomes a moral imperative to act, to protect these other children and their parents. Can you imagine a child 9, 10 years old lose her parents to cancer or heart disease?
Mhm.
I think these therapies in stem cells and stem cells specifically in conjunction with genetic modifications, genetic engineering, can save and improve so many lives. When you see the joy of a mother who has gone blind and hasn't seen her children for 10 years, when she can see her children, there's a huge motivational lift to understanding that the people of California, scientists, the doctors, the staff at the agency, the board members, are changing medicine and reducing the future of human suffering. It's a moral imperative because there's no reason to see other children lost when you know it's not necessary.
Yeah. And I have to say, for me, the best part of my job is the chance to get to know these families and to see parents of a child who had this deadly immune disorder when they were born and who otherwise would probably be dead, to see this child grow up, to see them go to school,
Right.
to meet families where they would have lost a loved one, where now they have a second chance at life. It's an extraordinary thing. And for me, it's a gift to be able to get to know these people and to be able to see the impact that the work you started, the work you helped create, is having such a huge impact on their lives. And if we were to go through all the awards you've been given over the years, we'd be here for hours. Most recently, you and your wife, Danielle, were honored at the World Stem Cell Summit, but you've also been named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people, as one of the Scientific American 50 by Scientific American magazine. Do you have one award that perhaps means more to you than others?
Yeah, the award and the reward that means the most is seeing the tremendous therapeutic advances and scientific advances. I know what it means when there are more than 3,000 peer-reviewed published medical discoveries. I mean, it's a revolution that's changing lives. And as you just said, when you see it in a family, when you see the child that survived, the parent that survived, the mother that conceived, that's the award.
Mhm. So you've obviously have a really great grasp of the science behind stem cell therapies, behind regenerative medicine. Did you ever want to be a scientist?
You know, I have enormous respect for the scientists and the doctors in this field. First of all, they have to go through an extraordinary, rigorous period in their life with sacrifice to get to the level of knowledge and to get to the level of training where they can make these contributions. I took a phenomenal human physiology course at Stanford. It really inspired me in the area, but I thought that my best talents would be in the legal area. Now, I've never practiced law, but I took my Stanford Law School degree and used that knowledge to write these initiatives. So if I can contribute by creating the structure and the funding and the process to advance medicine, it's my way of contributing, because I understand the remarkable talents of these scientists and doctors who are dedicating their lives to these medical advancements, and my talents in a different area. So I can contribute in a way that I can serve them, and by serving them, serve patients.
Speaking of serving, would you ever consider coming back to the board and contributing there?
You know, what's most important is to have the right person on the board. And the question is, what are the needs of the board at the time? What are the needs of medicine at the time, and the finance and the grant processes? What is the vision of the governor, lieutenant governor, the treasurer, the controller who will make the appointments? It was a great honor to serve as the first chairman and to get the agency set up and through the challenging litigation and get the Bridges program and fellowship program and the grant programs and the clinical trial programs, working in extraordinary fashion. But my goal is to serve patients. And I would consider it, if it was the right thing to do for patients, from the perspective of the board, from the perspective of the CIRM staff, from the perspective of the state government members who would handle the appointments. But at the moment, I'm focused on the area of affordable housing, because that's where my company is. And since I took a significant part of the last 2 years to pass this last initiative, I do have to work for a couple of years to get the company going again and functioning at a level that it can support my charitable commitments. And of course, it is a great honor to serve on a board that delivers such remarkable promise we could live for generations and never have this ability to change the future of medicine, to change the future of human suffering. So the board members, the members of peer review, the CIRM staff are remarkable change agents in the future of health and suffering and the future of our children, our families, and frankly, ourselves. If I'm valuable in the future to make another contribution, I would definitely consider it, but it is going to be determined by what's best for patients.
Great, thank you. You have had, I think, by any stretch of the imagination, a remarkable life. I mean, setting aside this creation of CIRM, you've been a captain in the Air Force. You've championed efforts to create more affordable housing that you were just talking about. You've been working to reduce the global risk of nuclear weapons and to help advance global economic development. What do you do to relax?
Well, my wife and I love going to the beach. I play tennis with my son, and looking forward to my grandkids getting old enough to play chess, but just being with them is a great joy, even if it's a kids' movie. It's a lot of fun. The difficulty is carving out all that private time. Mm-hmm. There's so much to do, so little time to accomplish it. And it's a balance between knowing that whatever one does in one's lifetime is going to influence your children and your grandchildren and their choices and opportunities in the future. And in this day and age, whether we actually get to live in a democracy or not, it's an incredible balance that I constantly work at, carving out enough personal time to be with my grandkids, to be with my wife, my kids, which is a great pleasure that I don't get enough time to enjoy.
Well, Bob, thank you. Thank you for carving out time to spend just a little of that with us. Really appreciated it. And good luck on all your endeavors in the future. I'm sure our paths will be crossing at some point. And thank you for being a guest on Talking About Regeneration.
So, Kevin, it's a privilege. Thank you for what you do. All of the staff at the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine at CIRM, the funding agency that you represent, that was created by the propositions for distributing the funding, are doing God's work for all of us and our families. And we know that you have many choices in private industry that would be much more rewarding. And so we're very indebted to you and all of the members of the CIRM staff for their public service and the impact they're making on the lives of every family in this state and eventually the country and the world. So thank you. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. I can't imagine a job actually that's more rewarding on so many levels. Well, that's our show for today. I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time on Talking About Regeneration.